Later today, you will walk into a small, brightly lit room, press a silver lever or a plastic button, and walk away. You will hear the rush of clean water, the swirl of a porcelain bowl, and then silence. Whatever you left behind is gone, instantly transported away from your home, your family, and your life. You will not think about the underground pipes. You will not think about the treatment plants. You simply expect the waste to vanish.
What if that simple, thoughtless act of flushing a toilet is actually the greatest and most consequential engineering achievement in the history of human civilization? What if the ability to make human waste disappear is the only reason modern cities are physically capable of existing? And what if, just over 150 years ago, the most powerful empire on the face of the earth was brought to its knees, paralyzed by disease and terror because it was literally drowning in its own excrement?
This is the horrifying, visually repulsive, and ultimately triumphant history of how humanity learned to build the modern sewer. If you had walked through the streets of London in the early 1850s, you would have found yourself in the capital of the largest empire the world had ever seen. It was the absolute center of global finance, industry, and culture. But beneath the polished veneer of Victorian society, a biological nightmare was actively destroying the city from the ground up.
London's population had exploded at an unprecedented rate, soaring from 1 million people at the start of the century to over 2.5 million by 1850. But the city's infrastructure had not evolved since the Middle Ages. There was no centralized sewer system to carry human waste away from the population. Instead, the millions of residents of London relied on a network of over 200,000 underground brick-lined holes called cesspits, which were dug directly beneath the basements and floorboards of their houses. Every time a Londoner went to the bathroom, the waste dropped directly into the dark, unventilated pit beneath their feet. When a cesspit filled up, it had to be manually emptied. Because the smell and the sight of this process were so utterly offensive to Victorian sensibilities, it was illegal to empty a cesspit during the day. The task was relegated to the dead of night, performed by a highly specialized, deeply stigmatized group of workers known as the night soilmen. The night soilmen worked in the pitch black between midnight and 5 in the morning. They operated in teams of 4. One man, known as the Hole Man, had the most horrific job in the city. He would climb down a ladder directly into the dark, disease-ridden sludge of the overflowing cesspit, sinking up to his waist in decomposing human feces. Using a shovel, he would scoop the waste into wooden tubs. A rope man standing above would haul the heavy, sloshing tubs to the surface, where 2 tubmen would carry them out of the house and dump the waste into a horse-drawn cart to be hauled out to the countryside and sold to farmers as fertilizer.
The cesspits generated massive amounts of toxic methane and hydrogen sulfide gases. Night soilmen routinely passed out from the fumes and drowned in the filth, or were killed when the explosive gases accidentally ignited from their lanterns. Because the work was so horrific, they charged exorbitant fees. And that is where the system completely broke down. As the population grew, the cost of hiring the night soilmen became too expensive for the working class and the poor, so they simply stopped paying. The cesspits overflowed.
The liquid waste seeped through the bricks, soaking into the soil, flooding the basements of the city, and slowly filtering directly into the shallow wells that provided London's drinking water. And then, a well-meaning invention accidentally pushed the city over the edge. In the 1840s, the modern flush toilet, known then as the water closet, started becoming popular among the wealthy. It seemed like a miracle of hygiene, but there was a fatal flaw. The early water closets didn't connect to a sewer, they connected to the exact same underground cesspits.
And because a flush toilet uses gallons of water with every use, the cesspits, which usually took months to fill, began overflowing in a matter of weeks. Desperate to stop their basements from flooding with liquid waste, the government passed a mandate ordering that the overflowing cesspits be connected to the city's rainwater drainage pipes. It was a catastrophic mistake. The rainwater pipes were never designed to handle solid human waste. Furthermore, all of these drainage pipes led directly and unfiltered into the River Thames, which cuts right through the center of London. Practically overnight, the River Thames, a majestic tidal river, was transformed into the largest open sewer in human history. Millions of tons of raw, untreated human feces, slaughterhouse runoff, and industrial chemicals poured into the water every single day. The river turned a thick, opaque brown. The waste formed massive, rotting banks of sludge along the shores, baking in the sun. And the absolute worst part? The River Thames was also the primary source of drinking water for a massive portion of the city's population. Water companies literally pumped the brown, feces-laden water out of the river and piped it directly into the homes of the citizens. The consequences were apocalyptic. Cholera, a terrifying and agonizing waterborne bacteria, swept through the city in massive epidemic waves. When a person contracted cholera, the bacteria attacked their intestines, causing diarrhea and vomiting so violently extreme that they could lose 10.
In the epidemics of 1831, 1848, and 1853, cholera killed tens of thousands of Londoners. The medical establishment was completely useless. Because germ theory did not yet exist, the leading doctors and politicians believed in the miasma theory. They believed that disease was not caused by bacteria in the water, but by breathing in foul, bad-smelling air. A brilliant local physician named John Snow tried to prove them wrong.
In 1854, during a localized outbreak in Soho, Snow famously tracked the deaths block by block, realizing that all the victims were drinking from a single contaminated water pump on Broad Street. He forced the local council to remove the handle from the pump, and the outbreak stopped. He proved definitively that the water, not the smell, was killing people. But the government, blinded by the miasma theory, ignored him. The water companies continued pumping the poisoned river water. The deaths continued. It seemed that nothing would force the wealthy politicians to spend the massive amount of money required to fix the city's plumbing. Nothing, that is, until the summer of 1858. In June of 1858, a massive, unprecedented heat wave struck London. The temperature soared into the 90s, and the River Thames, already choked with millions of tons of rotting human waste, began to literally bake in the sun. The bacteria in the sludge went into hyperdrive, producing staggering amounts of methane gas. The stench that rose from the river was so thick, so intensely putrid, and so physically overwhelming that people miles away were violently vomiting in the streets. The newspapers dubbed it the Great Stink. Normally, the wealthy politicians of the British government would have simply retreated to their country estates and ignored the suffering of the city. But they couldn't. The newly built Houses of Parliament had been constructed right on the banks of the River Thames. The Great Stink infiltrated the halls of government. The politicians who firmly believed that breathing the foul air would instantly give them cholera were terrified. They were seen running through the halls of Parliament with handkerchiefs pressed to their faces, gagging and weeping from the smell. In a desperate attempt to continue working, they ordered massive curtains to be soaked in a chemical called chloride of lime and hung over every window facing the river, hoping the chemical smell would mask the stench of the feces. It failed completely. The building became uninhabitable. Driven by absolute physical terror and the inability to breathe inside their own government building, the politicians finally did what years of mass death had failed to make them do. In just 18 days, they drafted, debated, and passed a massive emergency bill to fund the total reconstruction of London's sewer system. If you are finding this hidden history fascinating,
hit subscribe. There is more lost history like this waiting to be uncovered every single week. To execute this impossible task, the government turned to a brilliant, obsessive civil engineer named Joseph Bazalgette.
Bazalgette's plan was staggering in its scale and ambition. He realized that you could not simply dump the waste into the river in the middle of the city. He needed to build a massive underground network of intercepting sewers that ran parallel to the River Thames. These massive tunnels would catch the waste before it hit the river and carry it miles away, out to the tidal estuaries east of the city, where the outgoing tide would sweep it out to the ocean. To build it, Bazalgette organized the largest civil engineering project the world had seen since the Roman Empire.
Over the next decade, his army of laborers, known as navvies, excavated 3.5 million cubic yards of earth, entirely by hand. They laid 318 million bricks to construct 82 miles of massive, cavernous main intercepting sewers and 1,100 miles of smaller street sewers connecting every home in the city. The conditions were brutal. Men worked deep underground in the dark, constantly threatened by collapsing trenches, explosive pockets of methane gas, and the very cholera they were trying to eradicate. But Bazalgette's true genius was not just in the scale of the project. It was in his fanatical obsession with the future. Bazalgette insisted on building the massive sewer tunnels using a relatively new, highly expensive material called Portland cement. Unlike traditional lime mortar, Portland cement actually cures and hardens stronger when it is exposed to water. It was the perfect material for an underground river of liquid waste. But Bazalgette didn't just trust the manufacturers.
He personally set up testing laboratories, testing every single batch of cement to the point of destruction before allowing it to be used. And then Bazalgette made a calculation that would save the City of London a century later. When designing the diameter of the massive brick sewer pipes, Bazalgette calculated the densest possible population the city could hold, and he calculated the absolute maximum amount of sewage that population could generate. When he got the final number, he looked at his blueprints, and he made a decision that is still taught in engineering schools today.
He reportedly said, "We're only going to do this once, and there's always the unforeseen." Bazalgette took his maximum calculation and he doubled the diameter of the pipes. He over-engineered the system to an absurd degree, demanding massive, cavernous tunnels that seemed far too large for the city's needs. It was the most important decision in the history of urban planning. In the 1960s, a century after Bazalgette built the sewers, London underwent a massive architectural revolution. The city began building massive, high-density residential tower blocks, packing thousands of people into a single acre of land. The amount of water and waste generated by these towering vertical neighborhoods was staggering. If Bazalgette had built his sewers to the exact specifications of his original calculations, the introduction of the high-rise apartment building would have instantly overwhelmed and destroyed the London sewer system. The city would have flooded with waste once again. But because he doubled the diameter of the pipes, the Victorian brick sewers simply absorbed the massive new flow. Today, over 150 years later, the modern city of London, with its towering glass skyscrapers and millions of residents, is still relying heavily on the exact same brick tunnels engineered by Joseph Bazalgette in the 1860s. The butterfly effect of Bazalgette's sewers changed the trajectory of human history. When the system was completed, the cholera epidemics in London stopped completely. The terrifying Blue Death that had decimated the population was eradicated. Medical science soon proved John Snow right. Disease was in the water, not the air. And as soon as the water was separated from the waste, the mortality rates plummeted. The success of the London sewer system proved to the world that a densely packed, massive urban population did not have to collapse under the weight of its own biology. Cities around the globe, New York, Paris, Chicago, frantically studied Bazalgette's blueprints and built their own massive underground networks. Without the modern sewer, the explosive urbanization of the 20th century would have been a physical impossibility.
We could not build skyscrapers. We could not build sprawling subdivisions. We would still be trapped by the physical limits of the cesspit and the cart. Tonight, when you walk into your bathroom and press the lever on your toilet, listen to the water rush away. You are not just hearing the mechanics of plumbing. You are hearing the sound of the ultimate victory over a biological nightmare. You are experiencing a staggering luxury. A luxury built by men who shoveled feces in the pitch black, by engineers who fought against the terror of an invisible disease, and by a man who looked at the future of humanity and decided to build the pipes twice as large as anyone thought possible. If this story changed how you look at the invisible world beneath your feet, subscribe to the channel. There are more hidden histories waiting to be uncovered. Click the video on screen to see what else humanity left behind.